Of the New Orleans Saints list of rumored and requested head coach interviews, Mike Vrabel should be on top of the list. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the New Orleans Saints have already opened up their coaching search quite a bit, but they should consider doing more. We'll take a look at some of the candidates that they haven't been rumored to request or have interest in just yet, and who they can add to their list. We'll dive into Darren Rizzi getting some outside interest, an intriguing wrinkle there, as well as one head coach that might not be hitting the market that would have been high on the Saints list. A story to follow there. We're going to lead everything off, though, with a look at another power ranking of the 7 rumored coaches and requested interviews that we've seen for the New Orleans Saints thus far, and why Mike Vrabel should likely top the list. We got all that and much more coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. New customers can win $250 in bonus bets by just winning their first $5 bet. Head over to FanDuel.com today to get started. The New Orleans Saints coaching search continues on, and we have a list of coaches that the New Orleans Saints have either requested or are rumored to be about to request. Like they've been a request, like we'll figure that out. We'll take a look at all 7 of those coaches. I'm going to leave coaches out that the Saints have been connected to, but that there's been no interview request or rumor around just yet. So that rules out Kansas City offensive coordinator, former Chicago Bears head coach Matt Nagy, rules out Denver Broncos senior executive over there with Sean Payton. That would be David Shaw. So it's ruling those guys out, but taking a look at the other candidates that we've already seen. And I want to give you my power ranking when it comes to all these. And I'm going to kind of zig a little bit where most people would zag. So the top 2 candidates are the top 2 candidates. We know them. We know who they are. Mike Vrabel, I would put at the top of the list because Mike Vrabel represents an entire change. Right after that, I would put Aaron Glenn. I think Aaron Glenn would bring a lot of change too. I think he gets a bad rap of being the Dennis Allen 2.0, which is like so unfair to him. It's just that he coaches on the defensive side of the football and used to be with the New Orleans Saints. And so everybody's just going, oh, he's just Dennis Allen. But I don't actually think that that's true. I think that his leadership, his ability to connect with players, his experience as a former NFL player, a successful former NFL player on top of that means that when he speaks, people listen. I think that all of those things really make a difference. And also he's worked with some pretty hard-nosed coaches throughout his time. And I think he would bring a little bit of that intensity as well. So I think that I would separate him a bit from the Dennis Allen era. He might be more like the Sean Payton situation though. And so that's maybe where you still might go, got to get away from that Sean Payton side of it. So I get that. So that's why I put Mike Vrabel up at the very top. Culture builder, locker room guy, player guy. Might not necessarily get along with the front office at all times. I think the big thing, though, is that he's got to make the right hire when it comes to offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. He's got to make the right decisions at coordinator. I don't think you want him as your defensive architect, but you definitely want him as like your figurehead leader at head coach. And he's done this before. He's shown that he can do it. LaFleur over with the Tennessee Titans. You saw him bring in Arthur Smith as well, who I know his reputation took a big hit when he became a faulty head coach with Atlanta. But before that, very successful and one of the more successful names when it came to offensive coordinators in the NFL. And then it was just the last hire that he had that didn't work out very well for him. So that's where I look at the things with Mike Vrabel, to where you just want to make sure that he's surrounded by the coordinators that can get the job done on the offensive and defensive side, while you're the standard bearer, right? The example setter, the rah-rah guy, the leader, all that other stuff. The issue for New Orleans is that they're going to have a lot of competition for Mike Vrabel, right? And he's already been requested to be interviewed by the New England Patriots. The Las Vegas Raiders just opened their job. They have officially fired Antonio Pierce, making him a one and done from interim head coach to full-time head coach. And that's going to be a big thing. There's several connections, including Tom Brady, to that ownership group and Vrabel. And there was a lot of conversation with Tom Brady at the end of last year that made it sound like Vrabel might be the guy. Then they ended up going with Antonio Pierce. And so I don't know. There's going to be a lot of competition for him, but that's one of the reasons why he might be number one on the list. He's not going to be number one on just one of those lists. That makes him highly desirable. So I would go number one, Mike Vrabel. Number two, I would go Aaron Glenn. Number three, I like the idea of continuing on with change here. And so that's where Joe Brady comes in. He has a little bit of familiarity, but I think that he also gets a little bit of a bad rap in terms of the idea that like, oh, he's just another Sean Payton guy and all this stuff. The dude was an offensive assistant for 2 seasons. Like he was not a scheme guy. He was not he wasn't a dude that comes in and just brings you back to your Sean Payton days. He's gone off and he's had success with the LSU Tigers, struggled with the Carolina Panthers, rebuilt everything and showed you sort of his trajectory for improvement with the Buffalo Bills, coaching Josh Allen. Goodness gracious. I kept thinking Ronald Curry because Ronald Curry is the quarterback coach who used to be with New Orleans, but coaching Josh Allen, obviously very helpful, but look at what else he's been able to do with that team. I mean, he's built a top rushing attack. He's helped to build a top passing attack without big name weapons and all those other things. Like that's a pretty good situation or really a good resume, let me say it that way, that Joe Brady has built for himself, aside from a little bit of the connectivity with the New Orleans Saints. Up next, I think an interesting one for me is Anthony Weaver, the defensive coordinator from the Miami Dolphins. We spoke with Kyle Krabs of Locked on Dolphins not too long ago. Spoke a little bit about the inexperience that might end up playing into that. And I completely get that. I'm with him on that. But man, you want to talk about a culture guy, a dude that just leads like crazy. And this is a good fit, the New Orleans Saints, for a young head coach, because you're going to want patience. And the New Orleans Saints are going to have patience. They have to because of their salary cap situation, all those other things. I think a lot of people are ranking the New Orleans Saints very low when it comes down to like what they have to offer. But if you're looking at the short term, that's true. But none of these guys are looking to take jobs for 1 year. All of them are looking at the long-term implications of sticking around with a team. Young guys like Joe Brady, Anthony Weaver, and next on my list, well, not really next on my list, but another guy that's going to come up on the list is Kellen Moore, the Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator. But really next on my list behind Anthony Weaver would be Darren Rizzi. And then we're going to go Darren Rizzi, we're going to go Kellen Moore, and we're going to go Mike Kafka. Mike Kafka is not a guy that I look at and say, yeah, that inspires much confidence. Kellen Moore is just, a guy that we've seen be in this head coach conversation for so long and never land a job. You kind of wonder why. It's kind of the Eric Bieniemy situation there. So what's not clicking in some of those interviews that's not gotten him beyond that offensive coordinator position? But I think Darren Rizzi could be a guy that you go to pretty easily if you're the New Orleans Saints, but you can still change a lot. Like I still think the defensive side of the football is going to see a lot of change. You're going to have a new defensive coordinator there. And so with that being the case, you're going to see a new defensive scheme. You're going to see a new defensive approach. You're going to see, like, imagine Darren Rizzi remains the head coach, but then you hire Robert Saleh as your defensive coordinator because, you have some connectivity there. I mean, that's not a bad situation to be in at all. And that changes everything over on your defensive side. So I think you can hire Darren Rizzi and still find change. But the quickest path to change is all the other guys that are mentioned up above. Kellen Moore, I'm just curious about why it hasn't worked for him yet. So it would have to be an interview thing. And then Kafka, I just think doesn't inspire that much confidence. So that's the way that I look at it, with Vrabel and Glenn up at the top and then the rest of the field coming on beyond then. But I still think the guys that represent change still rank a lot higher for me when I look at everything so far. So those are my rankings so far, but Mike Vrabel, obviously, the Bella da Ball when it comes to this one. Coming up next, speaking of interim head coach Darren Rizzi getting some outside interest. We'll dive into that, as well as a potential candidate that we've been keeping an eye out on that might not hit the market, and that might be good news for New Orleans Saints fans. Let's get to both of those stories next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and my favorite place to go to make every moment more, especially here as we go into the playoffs. You got some heavy favorites. The Buffalo Bills, heavily favored in their first playoff matchup. The Baltimore Ravens, heavily favored in their third matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. A good thing to know if you're a first-time FanDuel user. You can go to fanduel.com now as a first-time user, put $5 down on a heavy favorite like the Bills, like the Ravens, and if they win, you win $250 in bonus bets. All you got to do is win that first $5 bet. So you can take a heavy favorite and turn $5 into $250. You can then use those bonus bets on player props, odds, live betting, spreads, parlays, all that kind of stuff. So go ahead and head over to fanduel.com today to get started. That's fanduel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints might have competition for their in-house candidate. What a unique situation we could be watching here for the New Orleans Saints. I put Darren Rizzi, admittedly, probably lower than I should on the list. I just think change is super important. I think experiencing as much change as you can this offseason, as much as what's really possible for this team, would actually be a good thing for them. Like continuing to just kind of lean back on the same old things, you're going to continue to see the same old results. And so I would consider, if I'm the New Orleans Saints, as much change as possible. It's the only reason why I bump him down. I think Darren Rizzi is a great dude. And I think he actually did a really, really good job with the Saints over the course of those last 8 games. Had that team bought in when it felt like it was leaderless early on in the season. I think that alone, just from the personal standpoint of coaching, is big. And all of that without having an offseason and everything, that was huge. Like to see that team re-motivated in a way that we have not seen them motivated over the course of the past post 2021 season, right? I thought that was a good showing for Darren Rizzi. So Darren Rizzi not only going to be speaking with the New Orleans Saints, we know that he will indeed be interviewing with New Orleans. He will also be interviewing with the New York Jets. The New York Jets have put in a request to interview. Oh, I should say it that way. Sorry. I don't know that he will be interviewing, but he has put in a request to interview with the New York Jets. I can't imagine, though, that the Saints deny that request. That would be indicative of too much in the midst of the coaching search. And certainly they wouldn't want to do him like that, right? Go out there and explore all your possibilities because there's no guarantee that the Saints are going to choose him. So why limit his ability to go out there and speak with other teams? And especially when the other team that wants to interview you has 14 candidates already. I expect the Saints to get over 10. They're already at 7. We just named 7 of them. And guys like Matt Nagy and stuff like that haven't even been brought up yet or haven't even been requested yet to our knowledge. So it does create a little bit of competition, though. And honestly, let's say the New Orleans Saints land one of their top guys. They get Vrabel, they get Glenn, they get Brady. Not all 3, but one of them. And then Darren Rizzi, let's say Aaron Glenn takes a surprise job. He goes to Las Vegas, excuse me. Vrabel ends up in New England and Rizzi's out there and available. What if the Jets were to hire him? It's actually a pretty cool story. He grew up, 15 miles, less than 20 minutes away from MetLife Stadium where the Jets play. It was such a big story when the Saints traveled to take on and beat the New York Giants earlier this season. All of a sudden, he's going back to that very same place to become the head coach of the New York Jets. Yeah, it's a pretty cool freaking story. So that would be a cool thing to see. I don't know if that ends up happening. I still think Aaron Glenn to the Jets is a big one to watch because somebody told me I shouldn't be using that. Actually, I'm going to rephrase that. That's not fair. They did not say that I shouldn't be using this phrase, but said that every time that I do use this phrase, that they cringe. So now I just think about them every time that I say this. But he's got the connective tissue over there with the New York Jets. And so maybe that ends up, limiting a little bit of what the Saints might be able to get done there, whatever it might be. It just kind of depends upon what it is that you value, right? The New York Jets front office, not really the model of stability or decision-making. The New Orleans Saints, their front office is the model of stability and that there hasn't been much changeover or turnover in the front office at all in many, many years. But salary cap, short-term stuff is something that maybe the Jets have a little bit of an upper hand in. So it's going to come down to whatever it is that the teams have to offer, whatever it is that Glenn decides is most important to him, right? And I think his connection with New York versus his connection with New Orleans, like that would certainly come into play as well, whatever that might be and whomever that might work in favor of. But clearly, New Orleans. I'm just saying, like, if you give me the choice between the two cities, I've proven already. I lived in New York and I've lived in New Orleans. Guess which one I came back to? It's New Orleans, baby. All right, let's look at the next story here that I wanted to dive into. How about this? the Chicago Bears requested to interview Dallas Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy, and the Dallas Cowboys declined the offer. Interesting. Very interesting stuff. Why is that so interesting? Well, first of all, it's funny to see two NFC North teams argue over a mediocre head coach. That's very fun. The other thing is the New Orleans Saints, I imagine, would have Mike McCarthy high on their list. He represents another person that they have some connectivity with, some familiarity with, and everything. He was an offensive coordinator here in New Orleans in the pre-Peyton days and everything. And so I think you look at where that could potentially end up. Like Mike McCarthy, if he became available, like Mike McCarthy to the New Orleans Saints could indeed be a thing. That would be somebody that they would very much be interested in. I'm sure he would at the very least, be brought in to be interviewed just for the specific dates. He was offensive coordinator here from 2000 to 2004. So, I mean, it's kind of a good sign if you don't want Mike McCarthy to end up here in New Orleans as a head coach, as a fan, to see the Dallas Cowboys decline that offer. Now, again, it might just be the NFC North pettiness that might be going on there that ends up creating that. One NFC North team requests to interview the head coach of another NFC North team for their head coaching position. Yeah, I'd probably say no too, right? If I was in that situation. But the other side is Mike McCarthy's contract doesn't expire until the 14th. And so with that being the case, right now through the 14th represents an opportunity for the Cowboys to exclusively negotiate with Mike McCarthy. So I think that they're going to go down the road of negotiating the contract with him, but that doesn't mean that it gets done. So this is an early indication of the I almost said the Dolphins, the Cowboys' interest of retaining Mike McCarthy, or at least retaining him long enough to do their due diligence and saving face almost, and having the conversation of negotiation of a potential contract extension with Mike McCarthy. But it doesn't mean that they actually reach it. So the 14th ends up being the most important date when it comes to Mike McCarthy's situation. So just one to continue to watch, but an early indication, at least from the organization, that there's some interest in him staying in Dallas, thereby not allowing him to become a candidate of New Orleans. But we'll see if that changes in the coming days. Here's the other thing. It's not just that if the Dallas Cowboys move on from Mike McCarthy, then Mike McCarthy becomes a candidate for the New Orleans Saints head coaching job. It's also the fact that if the Dallas Cowboys move on from Mike McCarthy, then they become the 7th team that has an open head coaching spot. Remember, the Las Vegas Raiders became the 6th today. Going into Tuesday, there were only 5 open head coaching positions: the Saints, the Jets, the Jaguars, the Bears, and then the Patriots. And 3 of those, the Saints, the Jets, and the Bears, were all in-season openings. New England Patriots opened up their search Sunday night, right after the game. That was a bit of a surprise. And then Doug Peterson was fired from the Jacksonville Jaguars job early Monday morning on Black Monday. He was the only actual Black Monday move. And then Antonio Pierce gets fired on Tuesday. So if the Dallas Cowboys were to open up, that becomes a really good landing spot for a head coach, because it's the Dallas Cowboys. That's a big market. There's a lot of drive, a lot of potential. People dream of having that star on their chest, on their helmet, whatever. We might not, like the Cowboys very much in New Orleans, but I mean, if you're an NFL head coach and you have the chance to coach the Dallas Cowboys, you might leap and jump for that opportunity. So I think that's the other thing to keep an eye out on here. It's not just, oh no, Mike McCarthy might become available. It's, oh no, there's some big time competition, and the Saints become one of 7 as opposed to one of 6. So keep that in mind as well. We'll continue to keep you updated on that as we learn more. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints should be adding other names to their head coaching list. And maybe one guy from college could be a really, really interesting candidate. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. And in fact, the only way that I'll play daily fantasy sports. I hate the mystery lineup competition. I just have to trust that my team wasn't as good as all those other teams. I don't know. I'm supposed to just trust that? No, thank you. I don't like that lack of transparency. I'm not really a fan of daily fantasy either, having to navigate injuries and playing in leagues with people that continuously send bad trade requests and stuff like that. I don't want to deal with any of that. So I use Prize Picks instead because it's super simple. All you got to do is look at the projection of the player that's playing and choose whether or not that player is going to outperform or underperform that projection. All you got to do is pick more or less. That's it. Do it for 2 to 6 players. You get some of those right, you go up to 1,000 times your entry back over at PrizePicks today. And with fast withdrawals, you can have that money right back in your pocket quickly. All you got to do is download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get a $50 bonus when you make your first $5 lineup. $50 when you play your first $5 lineup with the PrizePicks app and promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, run your game. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at Rocket Money. If you're an everydayer, you've heard me talk about Rocket Money a lot. And it's because I really like it. Like I actually use this product. This isn't just me like reading copy. In fact, I'm looking at the camera if you're watching me. And if you're listening to me, feel me looking into your ears. I don't know. That was weird. Anyway, I use Rocket Money. I like Rocket Money a lot. I love the fact that they help me save a bunch with those forgotten about subscriptions and everything. You've heard me talk about that, saving me money on those monthly automatic withdrawals that I completely forgot about, misplaced, all that other stuff. And the other thing that I really like, though, is the goals feature, to where you can set some financial goals. They'll put money aside for you so you don't have to worry about the monthly budgeting on your own. It's just a tool to help you reach your financial goals faster, something I'm very passionate about. So I'm very, very grateful for Rocket Money for the help with that. So get rid of those unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster by using Rocket Money today. All you got to do is head over to rocketmoney.com/lockedon to get started. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints have 7 rumored or requested interviews on their list, with Mike Vrabel being really the only rumored one, and that the expectation is that they will ask him to interview at some point. They don't actually have to request an interview. They just have to work out the schedule. So it sounds like there's interest there. So 7, let's call them established candidates, including interim head coach Darren Rizzi. But I expect that list to grow. In fact, I know that list will grow. And I've got some names that I would add to the list, including one college guy that I really like, and that is Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman. Now, we've brought on folks from Notre Dame, Tyler Wojciak, who covers Locked On, who covers the Fighting Irish for Locked On here. I understand that Marcus Freeman probably does not want to leave Notre Dame. It's a good setup. He's already a head coach there. It's one of the most historied franchises in the world of sports, not just in college and everything. It's one of the most recognizable brands, and he's finding success. Just wiped the floor with Georgia, now heading to the next level in the college football playoffs in the first year of its expansion. I really like what a guy like Marcus Freeman has done, and he is a humongous leader. I mean, big time leader, big time kind of Anthony Weaver type, like I was talking about, big time Mike Vrabel type, to where he can have that kind of hard-nosed relationship, but relates to his players, has done it himself, all those things. And just managing sort of this new landscape of college football with there actually being a playoff, knowing that you have to win a tale of several games in order to even get to a championship now. Just feels like he understands a little bit more about what the NFL process would be like. And of course, with all the recruiting and all this other stuff, man, sometimes that just gets exhausting, right? Like you're having to now recruit your players to continue to be your players because of the transfer portal and all those other things. So maybe eventually there becomes kind of like oh man, I would really like to not have to work around the clock all the time and work on keeping these kids here and keeping these guys here, these grown people here, and NIL and all this other stuff, like all the challenges that come with it. Like he's now kind of navigated a little bit of a free agency system, all these other things. I just think that Marcus Freeman is a guy that I would not be shocked to see there be some type of a reach out or request to. He's got a good relationship with the New Orleans Saints. Like when the Saints drafted Isaiah Foskey, they got him as a head coach on with us to speak to the media about Foskey and all this other stuff. Like just has all the signs of just being that dude. And I think if he made it to the NFL, he could be one of the few college coaches that translates to the NFL. We don't see it a ton anymore. Harbaugh, of course, just recently made that leap, but he's been in the NFL before. It was a surprise when Todd Monken made his jump from Georgia to Baltimore as an offensive coordinator. And so you look at Marcus Freeman as a guy that could be the next one of those really sparse people to make that college to NFL jump. And because of the way that college has morphed and its playoff structure and the importance of winning games now and how that's changed, the NIL situation of managing people making money, making a lot of money, the transfer portal in terms of having to navigate, maybe with a little bit more player power than the NFL, but navigating like effectively a free agency structure. I think all that plays in favor of a guy like Marcus Freeman, who also just brings the attitude, brings the juice, brings the swagger. I was talking to Scott Shanley for the Saints postgame show, and one of the things that he talked about was how he wanted to see a head coach hired by the New Orleans Saints that brings attitude, that brings swagger. And I think that that's a thing. Those are both things that a guy like Marcus Freeman, who is as passionate as they come about the game of football as well, on top of all that, and as passionate about his guys that are around him, he's somebody that could bring that. So maybe an unpopular opinion, I'm sorry, but I really, really like Marcus Freeman and hope that at some point he ends up at least with some contact from New Orleans, because never know what opening that door now can do for you in the future. Another guy that I wouldn't be surprised to see pop back up on the list for the New Orleans Saints, somebody that interviewed back in 2022, is Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores. Now, Flores is already getting intrigue from some other coaches. I'm sorry, from some other openings. My apologies. I would not be surprised to see Flores brought back here to New Orleans, or at least virtual, for an opportunity to interview again. He took that opportunity before, would have the opportunity to do it again. And again, I think he's somebody that brings you a blend of being able to connect with the young guys, but also be kind of this hard-nosed, demand accountability. Like, man, so many fans have talked about how they want the New Orleans Saints to just be accountable at that head coach spot. And I think Darren Rizzi brought a bit of that. I think Brian Flores would bring a ton of that as well, and would help you take this defense and completely reframe it, completely redo it, gut it. And in terms of scheme and system, you're probably not gutting a lot of the players, but you're gutting the scheme and the system and putting all that in a situation to where you can kind of modernize it a little bit. It's kind of the head coach to defense equivalent of offensive coordinator to offense equivalent of bringing in Clint Kubiak last season. So I could absolutely see and would be kind of surprised if they didn't. I think if they don't, I don't think the lawsuit has anything to do with it, because they interviewed him in 2022 when the lawsuit was very fresh. So I think if they don't, then obviously whatever conversation they had with him in 2022 has left a longer lasting negative outlook on him than a positive one. But I think if you see him brought back this year, I think there's some momentum there that could be made. So I really like Brian Flores. I like the way he coaches. I like what he demands of his players. I know there's a lot made of like his relationship with Tua Tagovailoa and all those other things, but keep Andrew Janocko, keep Clint Kubiak, let those guys focus on the quarterback. You focus on the rest of this team, and then focus on the defense, which needs rebuilding, needs a rebrand, if you will, needs a new scheme, new system, needs updates, all that kind of stuff. I think he would bring all of it. Finally, one more name that I wanted to bring to the table here is a guy that I really, really like. I don't know if anybody's going to give him any looks. Actually, I'm going to give you two names. I'm going to give you an offensive guy and a defensive guy. And the offensive guy the defensive guy is Kevin Minter, the defensive coordinator with the Los Angeles Chargers. I don't think he's gotten any head coach interviews yet or requests yet. I'll have to double check that. I'm not sure. He's a name that just came to me, actually, so I'm kind of throwing him in, Lanyap. But I just think father was a coach, has seen a lot of success with Harbaugh, has seen a lot of success from different coaching trees, has a lot of experience with a lot of different teams, a lot of outlooks, stuff like that. I just think that he's a guy that would be another one of those young guys that could come in, join a patient organization that will give him a lot of patience, let him rebuild the defense, and then see how you're able to tinker with the offense via addition over the course of the next offseason, and then make some of the wider swath changes in the near future. The other name that I wanted to bring up, though, was Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. He's not as young as some of the other like offensive minds and stuff like that, but man, is he a dude that just kind of showed up in the NFL and then took Lamar Jackson and that Baltimore Ravens offense and said, go forth and be awesome. And he did it. Helped get the Baltimore Ravens first wide receiver into the Pro Bowl, I believe, in their history. Certainly, if not in history, it's been since like the 70s or whatever. And is somebody that just comes from a lot of different coaching trees, and so just understands a lot of different offenses and approaches and things like that. He'd probably take play calling duties away from Clint Kubiak, which would mean Clint Kubiak would probably be heading elsewhere. Maybe he can come in as a figurehead guy. And when I say figurehead guy, I don't mean a guy that does nothing. I just mean a guy that like focuses on being a head coach, and then you have the coordinators do the rest. But Monken is definitely one that I would love to see the Saints also potentially tap as a potential candidate. So, all right, caught up in tomorrow's episode. Continue to break down everything going on with the coaching staff or the coaching changes and just taking a look more at where this New Orleans Saints team could be headed in the coming days. Derek Carr said he won't take a pay cut. I want to tell you why that's not surprising. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen. Go check out Locked On NFL for your second. And we thank you, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing them and how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.